Welcome everybody to what will be the last Future Strong of 2022, episode 48. We're delighted to welcome all of you. My name's Nikki Garchea, co-founder of Capfinity. Capfinity, an organisation focused on hiring and talent mobility, all powered by skills. We're delighted, as always, to be alongside my wonderful co-host, Lindsay Pollock. Hi, Lindsay.
Hello, Nikki. Happy holidays to you and everyone. So excited to finish another year of Future Strong with you. Everyone who doesn't know me, I'm Lindsay Pollock. I am author of 4 career and workplace advice books and a speaker and a very proud ambassador for Capfinity. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Looks like we also already have our good friend Fred Burke in New York City, where it's a rainy and yucky Friday morning. Looks like we have Trudy and Manny in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where it is also rainy and windy. So welcome, everybody, and please continue to introduce yourselves. Nikki.
Well, Lindsay, you and I have actually had some time to spend together. So before we introduce Lisa, which I'm so delighted to have you with us, Lisa, but we've got to show the picture of the week from last week, which was you and I with the wonderful James Boyle from Latham & Watkins by what is quite literally the largest Christmas tree on earth. Lynn Harris, you know James Boyle, so I'm so delighted that you're here to see his photo. But a great evening had at the Yale Club, courtesy of Lindsay being Yale alumni. Me, UWE, we don't have a club, but maybe we could get one. But great evening, wonderful to be with you in person. My highlight of 2022, don't tell my family, will be the amount of times we've actually been able to get together. So that's wonderful, Bailey. You can take the Christmas tree down now and we can get into the proper part of today's session, which is to introduce Lisa Marris. So Lisa, over to you. If you could tell everyone a little bit about what you represent, where you work, and how you come to do what you do.
Right, thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. So yeah, I'm Lisa. I'm the head of research at Cibyl. So Cibyl, if you may have heard of Group GTI, it's part of the Group GTI umbrella. And what we do at Cibyl is we research students and kind of really all young people at school or university about their career aspirations. So what they want to do after they leave school, whether that be university or just going to a job, or what university students want to do after they leave university, so their graduate career. So yeah, that's what we focus on. But of course, you know, mental health is a big part of everyone's lives, in particular young people's lives. And so we decided to do a research study that sort of reflected that, because it's becoming increasingly apparent that, you know, the workplace and personal life, you know, so intertwined, that comes with that mental health, and we wanted to capture that in a study. So we, what's brought me here today is, I guess, the outcomes of that research. It's publicly available. We started it first year a couple of years ago as a one-off study, and it's quite impactful. So we thought we should do this every year, make a tracking study, and kind of reflect the changes, because it started just before, or just at the start of the pandemic, and now the most recent results out are peak pandemic, and now we're in field work for our 3rd year, and that's probably going to reflect quite a lot of the current economic climate. I should say it's based mainly in the UK and Ireland. That's where we did the bulk of our research, but we work with global companies and international students as well. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Lisa. And will you tell us a little bit about your own career before we go into the study? So just share a little bit about what has brought you to be a researcher for Cibyl and part of Group GTI.
Yeah. So I started my career actually not in early careers, but in pharmaceutical research. My background is in biochemistry, so I started off in doing a lot of kind of primary and secondary research all around pharmaceuticals, but decided to make the transition outside of pharma into what would be is quite a slow-paced research world, into early careers, which is a bit more social research as well as market research, which is what I quite like about it. Been at Group GTI in this space for about three years now, so that's my background.
We love STEM women on this show. So massive beaming from me. Not enough people. Lindsay, I can tell you were super impressed with that background, but we should probably get into what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, so Lisa, mental health is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. I've been very public about my own ups and downs with anxiety, and my wish that when I was a student, I'd had more support and there was less stigma about some of the challenges. So I'm really curious to hear how mental health became a focus of Cibyl research, why. I'm thinking the pandemic might have had something to do with it. And there's so many different definitions of mental health, right? What does it mean to have a mental health concern? Can you talk about why you focused in that area and how you started to frame the concept?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the idea for the study came about initially, I think, a year or so before the pandemic, before it even started. And I think I sort of touched on this earlier. It just became, because we survey students every single year, we talk to employers, we talk to universities, institutions, all the time, every day. We work with over 100 employers, over 100 institutions. And it was becoming more and more apparent that mental health was, at the forefront of everyone's minds and was impacting career decisions and impacting university life. And so we thought, there's no better way to find out about that and what employers and universities can do to help by surveying students themselves and their experiences. So that, was kind of in the making. And when we first sort of coming together with the questionnaire, it sort of hit with the start of the pandemic. And so then the first round of our survey obviously focused quite a lot on that because, pandemic has a massive impact on students, but also just everyone's well-being. And then the kind of second year, we continued with that focus, and probably going forward, we'll move away from pandemic to other kind of related issues. I should say, though, that we don't just focus on current, climate areas that may be impacting mental health. We just generally just cover what students are doing and the support they get at university and employers and just what they're looking for and what they then do. On your kind of point around, mental health is so hard to categorize, and how do you do that in a survey? And we actually have lots of different questions around it, and we're constantly thinking about how better can we ask this. In our previous two studies, we've asked questions around, okay, what kind of anxiety, what kind of depression are you going through? We ask about disability, and if students kind of see their mental health difficulties as a disability, but not many people actually say that. But in particular, we have a set of 3 or 4 questions where if students have had any kind of indications of those kind of negative or difficulties in mental health, we categorize them as a respondent with mental health difficulties. And we do that by looking at negative thinking and behavior in the last 3 months or so. So that's looking at things like, having trouble concentrating, having trouble falling asleep, just negative thinkings in general, avoiding things because I'm finding them too stressful, putting myself down, thinking of, how I can be coping better. It is student life we're looking at. So thinking about working and studying, feeling like they can't cope with that, avoiding like socializing, those are the kind of things we sort of track in the study. But we also look at if they've had suicidal feelings, if they're currently experiencing kind of mental health challenges, or if they've, previously in the past experienced mental health difficulties. So that's how we categorize it in our survey.
Thanks for sharing that, because I think well-being and mental health sometimes becomes interchangeable. And as you walk through the things that you're looking at, they're clearly, substantial from a mental health perspective. One of the things I've seen you present a number of times, and Lindsay knows I'm a massive fan of the content that you deliver, but you often highlight some of the things that are surprising or maybe results that you weren't expecting. Would you share, if there are some in this study, some of the things that kind of stood out to you as a researcher?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that came out of this year's study was just how many respondents had a mental health difficulty, about 4 in 5, which is a lot higher than I would have initially have said. It's essentially the majority of people who fill in the survey, you know, students and recent grads. Also the fact that when we break that down into demographics, LGBTQ plus students, almost all of them, about 9 in 10 of those students have experienced a mental health difficulty, which is, you know, really quite high. But also kind of linked to that is when we ask students, do they, you know, have they spoken about their mental health difficulties? And we see actually the majority of students have, but there's differences within that. And so LGBTQ students, yes, you know, the majority of them, or almost all of them, have said they have mental health difficulties, but also almost all of them have spoken to someone about it. Whereas the student groups that, you know, less likely to have said that they experience these difficulties are sort of the least likely to have spoken to someone about it, and those are people like males, Black students, and Asian students. So I thought that was actually quite an interesting kind of link there, and I don't know how much of that is people aren't aware or comfortable coming out in a survey with mental health challenges because they're just not comfortable talking about it, or, you know, vice versa, or if that's just like linked in some way. So yeah, and a couple of other interesting things actually is might not necessarily be surprising, but where students are in their kind of journey at university differs mental health outcomes. So we find final years have expressed more mental health difficulties than first years, and particularly around the kind of exam, when we ask them why, it's like exam stress, anxiety, worries about finding a job, you know, those are the things that come out. And so I think again, you know, again, maybe not surprising, but thinking about how different student groups differ in their kind of mental health outcomes, and then essentially thinking about, well, why is that, and what can we help there? So yeah, that's what.
Thank you for bringing up the intersectionality piece. I think it's so important to talk about LGBTQ, but also particularly in the United States, I've seen stats, people of color, multiracial students experience significant challenges, refugees. There's so many populations, I think, that that have challenges that exacerbate the mental health concerns. I did want to welcome some more people who are watching on this very important topic. We have Tahani from Bloomington, Lynn, who Nikki already welcomed from the UK. We have Anne from Richmond, Virginia. Rachel, welcome. Please all. Oh, Trudy is here from the airport in Washington with Manny. So thank you for that, Trudy. Please share your comments and questions, audience. We always love to hear from you. Lisa, moving into maybe some predictions or thoughts on where we should be focused. It's the end of the year. People are starting to think about plans for the new year. How can we all who care, either from the university perspective or from the employer perspective, we do these jobs because we care about students. Where should we be looking? What should be on our minds? What are the issues that you think are going to come forward in 2023?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because just actually we have a question in the survey when we ask around, you know, how important is it when you choose at university or when you choose an employer that they have provisions? And actually, you know, 1 in 2 respondents say that they think about that. And that's actually a big increase from the year before. So it is becoming on someone's mind, what am I going to get when I get to university? What support I'm going to get? Does that employer care? That is becoming more and more important. In terms of what to focus on, I think definitely just support in general at university. We do see a very clear link between students that have come from an supportive environment, and we measure that in multiple different ways. Thinking about if they know where to get help, if they feel like the university is doing everything they can to help them, with their mental well-being, but also through COVID. If they feel like there is just generally support with, mental health. We find students that who've come from those backgrounds and those kind of environments, they have better mental health outcomes. So again, it's just really important from a kind of institutional university perspective, but also as employers, to provide as much support as you can. And I think that will really, really help. And I think with that, it needs to be quite practical. And why I say that is because there's definitely this wave of mental health that's coming, and the stage 1 of that was awareness, and we can see through our survey that quite a lot of people are aware of mental health. But what we aren't seeing through the survey is where to necessarily get that help, or they're not getting that help essentially. Or we also see quite a lot of essentially just still stigma around. So students, when we ask students, well, why haven't you got the support, or why haven't you reached out? It's like, I don't know how to talk about it. Yes, like I'm aware I need the help, but I don't know how to. And I'm worried that I might be judged or people won't take my concern seriously. So we definitely need to move from that kind of awareness to the kind of practical recommendations to people on a personal level, how they can help themselves, but also how, others like friends, family members, professors, teachers, managers, whoever can help individuals.
That's such a good point. I want to bring Nikki into this from the Capfinity Strengths positive psychology perspective, but I just can't help but reflect on my own experience. It just wouldn't have occurred to me to tell anybody. There was such stigma. And if anyone had said, hey, anybody feeling, a little bit weird, it would have been an opening, but it just sort of didn't happen. And I've had so many conversations since COVID, although it should have been sooner, with career services professionals, many of whom watch our show, who have said students break down, to your point, talking about their careers, their future, and it's in the career center that they talk about it. And then many career services professionals have told me they walk the student to student services or mental health because it's happened in the context of thinking about their future. But Nikki, I really want to get your perspective about how strengths and positive psychology can play a factor in this, because again, I think that's a trend that has grown alongside of these mental health concerns. It could be really valuable. Can you talk about your work in this context?
Yeah, and Lindsay, let's credit you for being so public on your own experiences, because that's taken a lot of courage and it's been recent. I know it's been really, really well received by people. I think we should come back to how more of us maybe should say more. This point around awareness raising, I think, is super positive that we've actually got to that point. I think the bit that I guess almost from an intervention perspective, and I'm not necessarily thinking of interventions that will tackle mental health straight on, but I'm thinking more about the university experience more generally, and then the career centre experience, and then thinking about what organisations do. And I think that students' experience of being at university is often so academically focused. And when I think about some of the interventions that organisations put in place, there probably is a little bit more from a mental health support perspective. But even if you think what L&D professionals do and how they construct learning, things like positive psychology and strengths do now factor into a lot of programs. We are trying to build more positive emotional resource in what we do in work, and things like working with your strengths, things like having gratitude diaries, focusing on building positive emotional resource on a regular basis are good support mechanisms when facing mental health experiences. And when I reflect on actually whether universities have got those resources, or even the thought to put some of that around the academic experience, I think there's still more to do. So I think when we think about creating more positive experiences for students, we really need to think year on year, are there more areas where we can look at positive emotional resource? And that's career centre, but it's also faculty. But moving from this awareness raising step into, so what can we do, I think is a big focus for 2023. And I think the work that Cibyl are doing in the research, but also Group GTI are doing in more mental health awareness initiatives with organisations and students more generally, is definitely what we need to do to get to the point where we're talking about intervention. And I know this is a UK report, but it absolutely resonates across the audiences globally that dial into this show. Lindsay, you've given me the finger.
I was
positively, negatively.
I would never give you the finger, Nikki. I have way too much anxiety for that.
Episode 48.
Really good. Trudy Steinfeld, our colleague at Capfinity, was head of the Career Center at NYU, and said, when I was at NYU, I had a wellness counselor on site. It was an everyday need that students opened up about what they were dealing with. I think companies will need to address this because these students are coming to them. And Trudy, that was several years ago. That's really, really profound. Nikki, I just wanted to bring that in.
I also wanted to make sure that the report link is up online. So Bailey, if you could put that in the comments section. It would be great as we think about kind of the future, what do we think are some of the things that we need to focus on from a student mental health perspective? Lindsay, we've obviously focused a little bit on our own research that's followed quite a similar pattern, but predominantly qualitatively to how Cibyl have focused their research. Anything that you've heard employers or career services say to you in terms of kind of what we need to do as we go forward?
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge none of us are mental health professionals, and we're all very clear about that. But Lisa, I'm really curious when it gets to solutions, right? Knowing the numbers is one thing, doing something about it is another. And I know, to me, it's incredibly profound when any other leader from corporate or higher ed just talks about their own mental health concerns. I did it accidentally on a webinar at the beginning of COVID, and the chat just blew up with students saying, thank you for saying that. Oh my gosh, thank you for talking about it. And I think it's very hard when you're young. I remember being very worried that if I talked about having panic attacks, for example, that someone wouldn't hire me or want to work with me because they'd be worried about that and it would hurt my career. Now that I have, been a little bit more established, I don't worry as much that I would be canceled for that one concept, whereas I really understand students are very afraid to talk about it. So I think the idea that more leaders can talk about it is really powerful, because a lot of people, and I promise, Lisa, there's a question in this, a lot of the corporate leaders say, I'm not a trained mental health professional. What am I supposed to do? And I think just simply openly talking about it is where I would put step one. What have you seen companies do? Again, acknowledging that not everybody needs to be a therapist. What can the average person who cares about this do? And what does Cibyl track companies really taking action on in this area? And then Nikki, I know you're a really strong leader in this way in your role as president of Capfinity. So after Lisa, I'd really just love to hear about what you're doing. Thanks.
Yeah, we actually have quite a clear question about this in the survey, where we ask students, well, what do you want from an employer? Like, how do you want them to help you with your mental health? And they actually come up with quite, sensible, practical things, just simple things like, getting a gym membership. Everyone, it's a commonly known thing that exercise can help with, well-being, and and that is what half of students say. Also, just generally healthy working practices, so a good working and life balance. Also, about like 2 in 5 students say just counselling service, so some sort of professional in-person on-site support, helpline, something like that, and also just generally mental health training for staff. So actually, quite practical practical things that employers can do. And in some things, getting a gym membership is relatively easy, and that's the top thing that comes out. Less so on the kind of mental health awareness days and things like that. So I think it was like sort of what I was saying earlier, where people feel like it is aware, people do know about their mental health. They just want actually now, okay, well, what can I do about the mental health, and how can, companies do, or employers, really help with that.
And Nikki, can you talk a little bit about how you're handling this as a leader?
Yeah, and I've spoken to Lisa offline. I know that GTI do a similar thing, which is things like having mental health first aiders. It's something in the UK that you can have training just as you would on becoming a physical first aider to attend a physical incident in the workplace. And there's both, the training is pretty thorough, I would say, in terms of how it's employees that put themselves forward to go on it, get trained in how to support an intervention. They're also typically publicised within an organisation, that you can go to that individual. And when people are inducted into Capfinity, they know who all the mental health first aiders are. And then I think there are broader things, and we're not perfect at Capfinity. Clearly, the strengths-based approach is helpful for building positive resource. But then there's other things like wellbeing initiatives, wellbeing wheels, where, to Lisa's point around gym membership, actually, sometimes it's quite holistic in terms of what people want. And I think at these times when particularly students might be joining our organisations and finances are an issue, actually being really clear on what are the benefits in the company, what financial incentives are there. All of those things also do form part of this level of clarity to support mental health and well-being. So I think there's very specific things to target somebody who might be in crisis, but then there's also more wider things, and taking a holistic view of your employees and their needs and being kind of very clear about what you can offer is pretty key as well.
Some support in the chat for mental health first aid training. Tahani said her institution offers that as well. I think that's really powerful. So I think there's a lot of energy here around action. I completely understand. We've had enough awareness, so now let's do something. I thought maybe each of us could share one thing that we recommend people do, noting that the holidays can be a really difficult time for people who struggle with mental health issues. Lisa, from your research and your experience at Cibyl, what's one action you would recommend people take? And then Nikki, to you, and then I have a thought as well.
Yeah, we have some like practical recommendations that came out of the report. A lot of different things came out of that. But, essentially, if I was to pick one, it's probably just being open and discuss. We see a lot with the survey. There's this big link between friendship and loneliness and mental health outcomes. But if you're able to talk to someone, if you're able to get that community, that sense of belonging, that can really help.
My one would be for anyone around us who we feel might be experiencing troubles, to maybe lean into that and not always sort of stand back and not intervene. I think sometimes when we think somebody might be experiencing something that we don't want to talk about, it's hard to go there. And in my experience, not just as a psychologist, but to your point, Lisa, as a friend, actually, we probably need to be a bit braver and open up conversations and encourage people to seek support. So mine would be to kind of be more observant and be a little bit braver in how we talk to people about their mental health. Lindsay, what about you?
I love this all so much. And from somebody who's been on both sides of it, I think as the person who might be suffering, two thoughts. One is, you don't expect your friends and colleagues to be therapists, but to have someone say, how are you doing? Or I noticed you were a little quiet. That's all people want. They don't want you to solve the problem. It's just to notice. And I would say just an awareness that some people who struggle with anxiety and depression are maybe not going to go to every party and every holiday event, and to not say, why didn't you go? It was so much fun. You would have been, it's just to sort of know that some people need a lot of alone time right now and maybe time to work out and all those things. So I think just an awareness that people observe the holidays or experience the holidays in the new year in very different ways is powerful. So that understanding and just that, hey, how you doing, is so powerful. I remember we had Erica Kesman on earlier in the show, and she said a question like, how are you really, is just a really simple way to bring up this issue. But I just can't even imagine this conversation happening 20 years ago. So bravo to Cibyl and to both of you for being leaders in this area.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for your questions, for your attendance. I hope if you're listening back, you've enjoyed today's episode. Lisa, Marris from Cibyl and Group GTI, thank you for time, being so given with your insights. Please, if you haven't downloaded the report yet, do. It's absolutely fantastic, really insightful and packed with thought-provoking content to really educate us about this very current topic facing young people and I think employees generally as well. So I'm going to pass to Lindsay. I think Lisa knows we do a quick summary of the takeaways, and then we'll let Lisa have the last word before we conclude. Lindsay.
Thank you to everyone for watching Future Strong episode 48. Thank you to Lisa Marris of Cibyl and Group GTI for sharing your mental health report. Today, we have learned that mental health, not surprisingly, is more and more impacting career and university decisions. 1 in 2 respondents to a recent Cibyl survey said that they think about mental health support when choosing a university or employer. And 4 out of 5 students surveyed this year have experienced mental health concerns, and that is higher for LGBTQ+ students. When it comes to what we do about it, less mental health awareness days, more action. That includes really practical things like gym memberships, offering more work-life balance, the availability of counseling services, and something that Capfinity and Cibyl and Group GTI and many companies do is offering mental health training, just like physical first aid, mental health first aid for staff. And I think the final thought and recommendation for all of us is just talk about this stuff. Don't make it a secret. Don't give it a stigma. Mental health concerns are everywhere. We all have them at some point. Just talk about it. Thank you, Lisa Marris, so much. And we'd love to give you the last word.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And if you do know anyone who is in the UK and are a university student and recent grad, please get them to fill in the current survey, which is currently live.
Wonderful. We'll make sure that link goes out with the episode. Thank you, Lisa, again. Lindsay, wonderful to have you on the show. And we wish everyone a very safe and healthy holiday time. And Lindsay and I will be back in the new year, a slightly different format, which we will share more on LinkedIn as we go into 2023. But rest assured, we have lots planned, and hopefully we'll see many of you in the new year. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for all your support across what's been another pretty roller coaster of a year, 2022. And yeah, happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Bye.